There's something in the air in England's second city, Birmingham. It's the smell of rubbish that has not been taken away in full for several weeks because of an industrial dispute between the local authority, Birmingham City Council, and some of the refuse workers. And the joke doing the rounds on social media is that Birmingham now has rats the size of cats. Is there light at the end of this very smelly tunnel? We will discuss on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. And to help us pick through the bins, so to speak, is Rob Mayer, who's political reporter for the BBC Midlands and Birmingham. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
First of all, can you just paint us a picture of what it's like when you go to the bit at Birmingham where the bins are rarely being collected these days?
Yeah, I mean, it has been pretty awful. I have stood next to some mountains of rubbish that are taller than me, that have contained all sorts of things from sofas to food waste, and the smell has been pretty horrible as well. It's tended to be worse in the poorer areas of the city, more densely populated, people with less access to transport to get to the tip, more people living in those houses as well. Got to say, though, over the last week or so, there has been a marked improvement. Birmingham City Council have told us today, actually, they think they've got through about 2/3 of the rubbish, and they think they can get all the backlog done by the end of the week. So it's been pretty grim for the last month or so, but things are getting better.
Oh, so there's light at the end of the rubbish tunnel.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah, they do seem to be getting their trucks out now. That was a problem earlier in the dispute where the lorries were being delayed from leaving the depots. The police stepped in basically to stop that happening. And since then, things have steadily been improving. Look, there are some places where there are still big mountains of rubbish, but they're getting through it.
But Rob, just explain how some bins are being collected. So it's not a total shutdown of the refuse service.
No, so not everybody who works in the refuse service is a member of Unite the Union. So some of them are still going to work at the moment. Birmingham City Council is managing to get out around 100 trucks a day at the moment. And they say they've got a contingency plan in place, and they think they can get everybody in the city a bin collection once a week.
And Rob, the dispute, what is it actually about? And I know that these industrial disputes kind of we focus on kind of the impact of the strike action and maybe a bit less on sometimes the quite granular details about what's actually being argued over / discussed / negotiated.
Yeah, it's quite complicated, but in essence, Birmingham City Council says it has to change the terms and conditions in its waste service to avoid getting into another equal pay dispute, the likes of which caused or was partly the cause of its huge financial problems. They declared effectively bankruptcy 18 months ago. As part of those changes, they say they need to get rid of a role on their bin crews at the moment, reduce it from 4 to 3. And the unions say that as a result of these changes, some of their workers could lose as much as £8,000 a year. That's something disputed by the City Council, who say they've offered retraining, they've offered other jobs as well to any of the workers who are affected. There was a ballot yesterday on an improved offer from the City Council, where we understand that some of the workers could have received a lump sum payment of £16,000. Not everybody, but some of them. The trade unions say you have to see that in the context that these people could lose £8,000 a year from their salary. So a lot of it is about money. A lot of it is about avoiding another equal pay dispute in Birmingham. And the City Council would say as well, look, our waste service, frankly, was a pretty poor performer before all this started, and we've got to improve the way things work, and that involves changing our working practices.
And Alex, Rob nodded to it a few times, but Birmingham City Council has gone through a very tough time financially in the last few years for various reasons, some of which are to do with previous equal pay claims.
Yeah, and some of it to do with a complicated IT system rollout that basically went wrong and ended up costing the City Council a whole lot of money. So councils can't officially go bankrupt, but Birmingham City Council in reality kind of did, because it couldn't balance the books. So it means that the residents who live there, the people who live there, have already had this period where they have seen really significant reductions in their services that they rely on, cuts to council budgets as the council's tried to get itself back on some sort of even keel. They've seen their council tax go up really significantly. And then at the same time, the bins aren't being collected. So you can see why this is causing a real sense of frustration in Birmingham. And of course, some of these issues relate to other councils as well. But I think in Birmingham, the situation's really come to a head with all these multiple factors coming together. And now this bin strike on top of it, which is having such a direct impact on the people who live there, that it has caused, I think, a real sense of frustration.
And Alex, I've seen a bit of speculation today that other places other than Birmingham could have the same thing happening there.
Yeah, so just a bit of context around this. Birmingham is not the first place that's had a bin strike, and I suspect it won't be the last place that has a bin collection strike. So, I mean, crikey, even just winding my brain back to when I worked in Southampton, I think I'm talking like 13, 14 years ago, there was a really significant bin strike that went on there for a long time over a dispute between unions and the council, largely over pay, but other things as well. Edinburgh has had quite significant bin strikes. So it's happened before, it's likely to happen again. And as we are talking today on Tuesday, there has been quite a lot of speculation that this could spread. Now, it's worth saying the situation in Birmingham is quite specific to Birmingham, exactly as Rob set out around the potential removal of one of those roles and the consequences for the people who currently work as refuse collectors. That specific dispute isn't likely to spread everywhere else. I've spoken to several union sources and people who work in local authorities, and they say there aren't any other disputes exactly of that nature that are just about to kick in. But there are already other places, so Sheffield and Peterborough, which have different kinds of disputes going on between council workers and councils over various things. One of them is about recognising a specific union. Another one is about pay. But they are different to what's happening in Birmingham. And everyone I've spoken to says there's not going to be like an immediate replication of what's happening in Birmingham everywhere else. But what is possible, what the boss of Unite the Union, Sharon Graham, has said today, is that if there are other places where workers are getting their pay reduced or their conditions in a way that unions don't think is acceptable, then they obviously reserve the right to take industrial action. So it's just quite an important distinction.
And I suppose, Alex, just the wider political significance of bin bags on the street, it conjures up those kind of archive pictures of the infamous winter of discontent in 1979 when Labour got turfed out of office and Margaret Thatcher swept in saying she'd literally tidy things up.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it is worth saying this as well. There are often, and there have always been, and there probably always will be, reasons for industrial disputes and action at local authority level, right? I mean, that happens. It's just that I think when it is bins, it is a very visible, obvious and quick impact on people that live in that area. If your rubbish isn't getting collected, then you notice it pretty quickly, and it affects almost everybody that will live in a council area, as opposed to perhaps just some people that rely on a specific service if there is an industrial dispute affecting that service. So I think that's why it has such resonance, and that's why often bin strikes in particular get such a lot of traction, because you can see it, you can smell it in some cases, and it affects everybody in an area very, very quickly. It's like a real visible manifestation of a council service that isn't being done when there's like an industrial dispute like this.
Yeah, and interestingly for me, psychologically, journalistically, I sometimes, like when people are talking about, the reason you should care about the upcoming local elections is because it's about who empties the bins. And I sometimes go, oh, no, it's not just bins. It's also adult and social care and special educational needs for children. And like council budgets are so much more than just who empties the bins and sweeps the streets. And then until the bins don't get emptied, and then actually you realise bins are really important.
Yeah.
So actually maybe I shouldn't be grimacing when people say it's all about
bins are really important, but and potholes are really important because it affects people's day-to-day lives. But exactly as you say, that isn't all that councils do. They do some other stuff, supporting the most vulnerable in society, sorting out housing need. They do a whole load of stuff, even down to swimming pools and libraries and all the other stuff that we know about. But I sort of think if you think about the things that you will notice quickly on a day-to-day basis when things aren't going right, it is things like bin collections and roads that will come to the forefront of your mind because they have a very immediate impact on everybody. And it would be that, perhaps if somebody else that relied on a different council service, like special educational needs and disabilities support or housing support, they would notice if there was a disruption in that service. But, bins is something everybody in a local authority area is going to notice pretty quickly.
Rob, to end with you with two Birmingham-specific questions. First one, has this been a sort of heartwarming episode as well, with neighbour helping out neighbour with their old bin bags?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen evidence of that. I've seen, people helping out with community litter picks. Also, in some instances, people are even sort of hiring their own bin lorry to get things taken away. And we've seen as well the sort of sense of humour around it as well. There have been some fantastic memes doing the rounds. I think my favourite one of the "Welcome to Birmingham" sign, and then just underneath it said, "Rats as big as cats," instead of "twinned with wherever it is we are twinned with." So people have been able to have a laugh about it, even though it is obviously a really serious issue, and people have been worried about public health as well.
Yeah, and on a sort of less funny note, like, what is the latest with Birmingham City's finances overall? Because we covered it quite a lot when the problems initially emerged, and then we covered it again when the council said these are some of the things we're going to have to slash to balance the books. How does it sort of feel financially at the moment, apart from this whole bins issue?
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. I mean, we've seen another big council tax rise this year, more than 7%. They have cut £300 million from their budget over the last 2 years, and there will be more to come next year. We've got community centres closing, libraries having reduced hours, street lights turned off, all sorts of things, less money spent on looking after, children who need help. So it is really, really difficult stuff. And there's no end in sight to that. On the equal pay claim, what we do know is that what was originally thought could be £750 million is now down to about 250 million. So that's obviously a big difference, which is welcome. But yeah, there are more cuts on the way for a city that's already seen huge cuts to its budgets over the last couple of years.
It's also just worth saying that equal pay claim issue is a separate issue, but it's worth noting that is rumbling along at a lot of other local authorities as well. So that's something else to keep an eye on.
Alex, thank you very much.
Pleasure as ever.
And Rob, making your newscast debut, I have to say, what is it like being a political journalist with the surname Mayor, especially since you cover local government a lot?
Yeah, I get that. I do get that joke quite a bit, Adam. Yeah, I've heard that one before, I'm afraid to say. But yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're still waiting for Chris Mason's stoneworking podcast. That's still in development. Rob, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Right, let's get an update on the US-China / entire world trade war, because I haven't talked about that for a couple of days. Basically, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is on a kind of goodwill tour around lots of Asian countries, presumably trying to suggest to them that he is a much better partner for them than Donald Trump would be when it comes to trade and security cooperation. But the latest kind of missive from Washington has come from the Vice-President JD Vance, who's done an interview where he's been incredibly complimentary about Britain, not just the late Queen and the King and Donald Trump's business, not just the late Queen and the King and the prospect of a royal visit, but he's quite complimentary about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and very optimistic sounding, maybe a bit tactically so, about the prospect of a US-UK trade deal. Remember, the UK were working on that to try and avoid the tariffs, and now they're still working on it to try and, avoid the tariffs. So let's find out what is going on and try and join all these global dots, because joining us on the line now is the BBC's China correspondent, Laura Bicker. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Adam. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. I hear you've just been editing a big piece for the news.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Is it done? Should you be doing this conversation right now? Anyway, also on the line is Faisal. Hello, Faisal.
Hi.
I heard a rumour that last week you were covering all the tariff chaos from your actual holiday, so that is dedication.
I felt dedicated, but these days you can do quite a lot of work wherever you are. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah, I hear remote working is a big thing for everyone else. Right, Faisal, and before we talk about the latest with China, what's the latest with this US-UK trade deal? Because JD Vance, the Vice President's done this interview with the Unheard website, which everyone's sort of trumpeting as his first interview he's done with a European publication. But he sounds quite positive about this prosperity partnership they've been working on for a while.
Yes, they were very warm words, no doubt about it, and obviously warmer for the UK than for the rest of Europe to some degree, although I think the general vibe in the interview was to try and perhaps make up for some of the spikier stuff he said over the past month or so. It's clear that there's a deal to be done. What deal actually, the detail of what it entails really does matter, because the phrase trade deal 5 years ago would have meant a full fat free trade agreement on every good, with lots of controversial stuff around food standards and just all sorts of medicines pricing and the like. But I think this is a very much more narrow thing that they're talking about, which was essentially conceived of to try and stave off these tariffs. Now they've levied the tariffs, so I'm not entirely clear what's up for grabs for us here. It really does matter. But I also think, maybe we'll get onto this later, I also think actually that the shoe's on the other foot of it now. The whole point of the art of the deal here was that maybe you can get off the tariffs, maybe you can't. I don't think we can get things down from 10% universal tariff that's been applied to everybody. And for my mind, the US needs some deals, because the sort of riot in the financial markets last week, it was kind of calmed down by the prospect of them doing deals. And if they don't do one with the UK, which must be the lowest of low-hanging fruit you can do, I just think we've got a bit of leverage here. They need the deals.
Yeah, but what does victory for Trump look like in a trade deal with the UK? Is it our old friend chlorinated chicken?
Well, I just don't think that stuff's on the table.
No, I don't think so either.
Does. We've used this phrase 4D chess, 3D chess quite a lot, but this is it a little bit different when you're playing chess on two boards at the same time? Is that 3D? I don't think that is 3D chess. That's just like multiple chess.
That's just 2D chess twice.
Right. Okay. Well, 2D chess twice is what we're doing right now, because we have this thing going on with the Americans where I'm not sure what the win is, because I don't think they're going to come down from the 10%. So what is it they're going to offer? And then on the other hand, we have this deal, this reset on Brexit with Europe, and the two things do interact. And we're really going to test the Prime Minister's sort of mantra that we don't have to choose, because I think on these issues, we do.
And we got a little reminder today of just how long the UK's been trying to get some kind of trade deal with the US, because Theresa May popped up to speak to Women's Hour, and here's what she said about trade with the US.
Well, I think we've been looking at doing a trade deal with the United States for some time now, and it's good to hear the Vice President saying that there's a good chance that we can do that deal. I think the important thing for the Prime Minister is to keep calm, to keep those negotiations going, to know what we want as the United Kingdom from the trade deal, because this has to be a deal that is good for both sides.
How nostalgic hearing Theresa May talking about a deal that works for both sides. Right, Laura, tell me what you've been finding out, because you've been out and about filming and speaking to people. How's the Trump trade war with China actually playing out in China itself?
So news gathering in China always comes with caveats. I always kind of write to the news desk and go, "Hi, I'm going off gathering. Please bear in mind that people in China are not very keen to talk about anything to especially international broadcasters and especially BBC. But we have been at the Canton Fair. Now, this is held twice a year. It is the longest running trade fair for importers and exporters in China. Now, it is huge. Like, think of an airport and then times by 5. It's the size of like 200 football pitches. So we only went to one area of it, and there are hundreds of companies there. So we went to each one in turn and we're asking, how's things? How are things going? And anyone who exports to the United States, they kind of made a bit of a face. And then they said, well, obviously, we have stockpiles of goods now sitting in the warehouse. So if you are making food mixers, washing machines, blenders, coffee machines, oh my goodness, everything from your household appliances, all of these things that are coming from China, apparently orders have either stopped entirely or they're being put on hold, which means that warehouses here in China are now full of products that would be being shipped to the United States. So amidst for the last week, we've heard Beijing being very defiant, vowing to fight to the end of any trade war. But I think what we're seeing amidst all of that pride is there is pain at the end of it.
And Laura, I'm thinking back to the conversation we had a few months ago when Trump put his first round of tariffs on China. And you said very wisely, the Chinese economy we're talking about now is quite different from the Chinese economy from Trump's first term, because the Chinese economy now is less kind of exposed to trade with America. But it sounds like maybe that view has shifted a tiny little bit? I mean, you're still broadly right, I'm guessing. But
No, I think there are a couple of things to say. First of all, yes, China is less reliant on selling goods to America than it once was. It makes up about 1 to 2% of China's GDP. So that doesn't sound like a lot. But if you are a company that has workers, if you are a company that perhaps maybe 20% of your company, it sells goods to the United States, where are you making up that shortfall? And already here in China, there is a bit of a sluggish economy. People here are not spending the way that they used to. The economy is not in the shape it was in the last 10 years. It's not growing in the way that it was, say, 10 years ago. And that is because manufacturing has slowed down. And of course, here they've got a major housing crisis. So much of the middle class, for instance, ploughed their income into buying a home. And only in the last 4 years, they've watched that house price plummet. So they're not in the mood to spend money. So it's not like these companies can turn around and say, right, we'll fill this gap by selling to the domestic market, because the domestic market is incredibly sluggish. So I think there is a resilience there. And I think out of every country in the world that could face off with the United States, China is in a very, very good position. However, it's not right now in the best position that it could be, and it still will hurt. I mean, around 10 to 20 million workers labour in making goods that go to the US market. So that, in effect, is that's a number of jobs that could be lost. And of course, already the likes of Goldman Sachs, HSBC have rounded down China's growth forecast. China's still being defiant, still being bullish. I mean, you meet people and they'll say, no, we have been here for 5,000 years as a country. Without the United States, we'll survive for 5,000 more. We have a strong domestic market, we'll be fine. But amidst that pride, I think what I saw today are a lot of people going, what is going on? And I think that's the big thing. I mean, many of the traders also turned to me and went, surely Trump will just change his mind. Surely President Trump will change his mind. That's what he does. I've got my fingers crossed that it'll all be over in 2 months. But it doesn't seem that negotiations between Beijing and Washington are even taking place.
And Faisal, I mean, the Trump tariff story is quite a crazy ride. Where do you think we are today? I'm just thinking, I haven't seen you since, for example, at the weekend, the Americans said, oh, there'll be a tweak to the tariffs for smartphones, which was sort of presented as helping Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, but actually helps the Chinese companies that make the iPhones.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think right now the markets look like they're calm. So that's both the stock markets and the government borrowing markets, the bond markets. And that was what particularly spooked some in the administration last week. And it's important to note, though, that there's a big but there. They're responding to the perception of exactly what you described, which is a sort of rowback or retreat of some description on. You take iPhones from China, where Laura is right now. That is the most kind of iconic export from China to the US. Its biggest, I think, single goods export by category was smartphones. So to exempt this and to sort of sneak it out in a sort of technical customs messaging alert without really announcing it, I thought was quite something. And they couldn't do this just for China. They had to do it across all these categories. Now, they argued immediately, or some arms of the US administration, that, oh, no, this is just temporary. We're going to bring back all these things later. But I thought it was quite something. The markets have responded to that. Markets at the minute want to see signs, a bit of retreat, a lot of negotiation. Everything's going to sort of row back. But the fact is that the row back, if you could quantify it, went from the measure that we use is tariff income as a proportion of imports. So it was, before all of this, 2.5% for the US. It did go up to, or was heading to, 25%, highest for 100 years. What we've seen in terms of rowbacks, indeed of that big reciprocal tariff, which was all those different figures for different countries, has taken it down to about 20%. It's still a massive increase in the tariff wall around the world's biggest economy, and things have reduced essentially into the two big beasts of the world economy, kind of like rutting stags, kind of up against each other, in a fight. And I think what's really interesting is when Laura talks about the warehouses that are full in China, in Shenzhen, in all those places. But you also have the shipping systems gumming up cargo around the world. You have in ports in America, not really because of China, but because of Mexico and Canada, you have it full of cars that have been stockpiled. We're just in the foothills of the physical manifestation of this trade shock. The financial shock waves are just on pause. They haven't gone away. And really, if the US wanted to get to where they are right now, which is, if you like, reducing to a bit of a huge fight with China, you wouldn't have chosen to have isolated and annoyed all of your allies in the first place, because China is now thinking, well, hang on, we can export this stuff around the world, potentially, and we can also form or reform geopolitical alliances with all of these suppliers to America of advanced electronics and chips. So there's a lot at play, and I just, they may argue it's all 4D chess in the Trump administration, but no way, if you were expecting it to reduce down to US versus China, as it clearly has, would you have chosen to have alienated so many allies? You need them on side, really, if you're trying to win against China. And there's not much evidence of that just yet.
And talking of allies, Laura, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has gone on a big regional tour around visiting lots of Asian countries. Is this him trying to hoover up countries that maybe would have been a bit more friendly to America in the past, but are now like, no thanks?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. So a lot of these Southeast Asian countries will not want to lose access to the American market. They also will not want to face, and they won't afford the tariffs that they were facing, certainly up to about 35-40% for some of the Southeast Asian countries. And the reason that they are facing these tariffs is because America wants to punish them for allowing China to funnel goods. I mean, a quarter of Chinese exports come from a second country like Cambodia, like Vietnam, where President Xi has been. Now, China and Vietnam have just signed 45 new agreements, but I think the biggest picture for China will be, look, we are here shaking your hand, we are here for you, Southeast Asia. Where is the US? Can you really trust the United States anymore? We are a stable global trading partner, and we are here to help you succeed. And China has been the one that's been there for infrastructure projects, railway projects. China is the one that's been giving some aid, and there is talk of China replacing some projects that were funded by USAID. So where you see US retreating from the world, you see China moving in. But more importantly for Beijing, they will be concerned that while in this rush, you've got the likes of Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia trying to do their own trade deals with Washington. What they will not want these countries to do is sign a trade deal where perhaps Donald Trump says, right, okay, we'll lower the tariffs for you, but you can't be doing any business with that there, China. So I think that's the kind of thing that President Xi will want to avoid. He's seen the danger, he's acted quickly, and this is his first trip abroad this year. So he has gone to Southeast Asia, yes, to shore up these friendships, but also to send a message that China is there for them.
Now, both of you, help me understand this. Why is my social media feed, particularly on X and TikTok, now full of Chinese entrepreneurs, like the ones you've just been meeting, Laura, explaining why your very fancy handbag that you think is French is actually Chinese? Laura, what's your theory about what's going on there?
It's very clever, isn't it? Because here in China, we have very limited access to any social media.
Oh, yeah, you're not seeing this. Yeah, well, I'm glad to break the news to you.
But yeah,
do you want some skiing videos as well?
Yeah. Luckily, I have a VPN and able to kind of jump the giant firewall. But it's interesting that Chinese social media is managing to flood Western social media with these influencers. So basically, there's a lot of these adverts. I don't know if you've seen the one where they've also replaced Chinese factory workers with US workers making iPhones or making like clothing. So. Yeah, unflatteringly so, yeah. And of course, you've got these influencers going, look, here's your Chanel handbag. Did you know that it's actually made here in Shenzhen or made in parts of China? So, I mean, even at the trade fair today, for instance, a lot of the appliances, yes, they've got a Chinese name name on the front, but actually when you look through their catalogue, you're like, oh, that's made for Panasonic. It's made for Breville, this toaster. It's made for other names. So you kind of, a lot of Chinese brands that are made in Chinese factories are actually bought up by big names. And basically what they're saying is, hey, look, now you need to know exactly how your products are made. We're labouring here, some of them working 14 hours a day in factories here in Guangdong, the factory of the world, to make your products. And I think they're trying to let people know this. Chinese social media has become a lot more savvy in recent months, especially after Xiaohongshu. I don't know if you remember Little Red Book. Actually became the biggest downloaded app in the United States. And of course, all of this when they thought TikTok was going to be banned. So it's a bit of poking fun. And yeah, it's managing to worm its way into lots of Western media feeds, just like yours, Adam.
Yeah. But Faisal, what's your theory about what the Chinese might be trying to achieve with this? Because this is clearly not happening by accident. This is being manipulated so that we get this. Is it to make the world get used to the idea of buying Chinese products? Because actually trade from, I don't know, the West, if you talk about America being the anchor for the West, is going to become more difficult. What do you think is going on here? And also, why am I seeing all this stuff on X? That's a platform owned by Elon Musk, who's an ally of Donald Trump. Is it maybe a subtle dig by Elon Musk that he wants trade to be a bit freer again?
Well, I think that there is a message there, isn't there, that China is saying, well, we can play by the rules or we don't have to play by the rules. One of the things around China's incorporation into the world economy and attending the G20 and the World Trade Organization was that they did crack down on some of this illicit copyright theft, essentially, and they played ball with agreements with Western nations that they wouldn't do this. And indeed, they were still the workshop. I'm not sure how authentic some of these claims actually are, and I'd be amazed if everyone thought, or all the purchasers really did think that they were all being made in some boutique leather craftsman shop, in the back streets of Venice or something like that.
Atelier.
It seems somewhat naive, but I think the point is that, and we've also seen a move on Boeing. The idea that China's just announced they won't buy Boeing airplanes. So what you're seeing is China sort of flashing out to the rest of the world, and in particular to the US, that they have a number of return channels if the US continues with these 145% tariffs, where they can bring this trade war directly to US businesses, to US consumers, to the US stock market. And no doubt there's considerable damage being done to the Chinese economy too. But the other argument here is, well, but we can trade with the rest of the world. This is why I'm a bit intrigued that they've chosen to go for mainly European luxury brands, because actually the play, if it was all directed by some, with a joystick and a button from somewhere in Beijing by the government, really you would want a bit of a charm offensive on Europe. We've seen meetings with Ursula von der Leyen. We still don't know exactly what's happening with a much vaunted prime ministerial trip to Beijing, and in the mix of all of this is a fascinating trade-off for the UK about whether the Americans try and get the UK to join in with the containment of China, which goes against the stated strategy, post-Brexit Labour government economic strategy, which is to be the most connected economy in the world. We're still friends with the US, we're getting a better goods deal with Europe, and we're still connected with China. Indeed, ministers are out there, Douglas Alexander out there this week trying to get investment. Now, is that sustainable if we try and, I said it was 2 games of chess we're playing, 3 games of chess we're playing simultaneously, trying to get, you can see the win here in the world. You definitely can see the strategy. They don't even want to talk about that strategy right now because I think they want to secure the US deal, they want to secure the EU deal, and they want to keep the plate spinning with China. Now, this may just prove too clever by half. You can see what they're trying to do. I don't know. Laura might have a view on is the Prime Minister even still going to Beijing? We don't know. That would be an interesting thing to do right now, whilst we're trying to negotiate some sort of something with the US if it's still available.
Well, and also, as we've just said, we might be welcome to Chinese investment, but not in one particular steel plant in Scunthorpe
Well, exactly.
by one particular Chinese company. Laura, do you want to have a final word? Faisal's thrown lots of plates up in the air. Which one do you want to spin?
That and your 4D chess, I'm totally lost. But I think when it comes to what China is trying to do, it's trying to open its arms to the world. We've had several years of the wolf warrior. We've had several years of them.
But when they were
their
basically
teeth.
mean on social media, now they're trying to be nice.
And I think what we're seeing now is a China trying to be a bit more friendly. I'm not sure it's a joystick being operated by Beijing. It's certainly perhaps been disseminated in various channels, but these are influencers that still exist. And many of these influencers who speak English are trying to become big names on Instagram. We've even seen lots of Trump impersonators who've become pretty big on the likes of Instagram. And these Chinese Trump impersonators are inviting influencers also into their homes. I think what we're seeing is a China that is prepared to poke fun a little bit at itself, but also at the United States. It's trying to say to the world, look, we're not this mean guy that you think we are. We're here to be your friend, and we are a stable alternative world leader to the United States. Have a look at what the United States is offering. We offer something different, and we do have people who are able to kind of look relatable. And I think that's what it's about.
Fascinating. Laura, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, my love.
And thanks to you too, Faisal.
Thank you.
And that's all for this jam-packed episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back with another one very soon. Bye-bye.